All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We still have a few folks trickling in, so we'll just give it a few more minutes. In the meantime, we ask that you check that your camera and your microphone are turned off. At the bottom, you'll find these at the bottom of your screen. This just helps with bandwidth issues. Also, just to get us thinking about water and water conservation, if in the chat box, if you could let us know why water conservation is important to you. You can find the chat box right in the middle of your toolbar labeled chat. So go ahead and put in why water conservation is important to you. A lot of great responses coming in on why water conservation is important to you. Here in the Palouse, we're pretty lucky that we have these amazing tributaries and rivers that pass through, and a lot of us have a personal connection to water in some form of another. So yeah, water is life for a lot of us. So thank you so much for sharing what water conservation means to you. We'll go ahead and get started this evening. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about this resource that affects all of our lives. And we appreciate you choosing to spend your evening with us. My name is Jody Prout, and I am the Education and Outreach Coordinator at Palouse Conservation District. I'm also joined by my colleague, Elizabeth Sebo, who will be monitoring the chat and coordinating behind the scenes this evening. So thanks, Liz. For those of us that may not be familiar with Palouse Conservation Districts, the district is a local government agency that engages with landowners on a voluntary basis to help keep our air, water, soil, and habitats healthy. We are one of 4 conservation districts located in Whitman County. We have a staff of 17, 3 AmeriCorps members, and then we have a 5-member volunteer board. Our mission is to foster the voluntary conservation of our natural resources by providing the tools, education, technical expertise, and financial assistance to support our local community. So for the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to ask you to please mute yourself and turn off your video. Those controls can be found on the bottom left of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, you're welcome to drop them into the chat, or you can hold on to them until the end. When you'll be able to either unmute yourself to ask questions to ask our speaker directly, or you'll be able to ask questions also in our chat. This talk is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website and YouTube channel tomorrow. We will be providing a limited number of water-saving device kits to our participants tonight. Everyone that indicated that they would like a water device kit will be receiving one this evening. The kits will contain a water-conserving shower head, an installation tape, 2 faucet aerators, toilet leak detection tablets, a hose spray nozzle, and a shower timer. And we'll be contacting you after this event if you qualify to receive a kit. Kit pickup times are scheduled tomorrow and Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. at the PCD office, which is located in the WSU Technology Park in Pullman. And more exact information will be sent out in the email in terms of getting to our office. And if you receive an email, but for some reason you're not interested in the kit, please let us know so we can pass it on. We have a set of kits that will be donated to the Community Action Center and then redistributed out to our community. So it will be passed on to a family that can make use of it. If you don't think you can use everything in the kit, we still encourage you to pick up yours and then distribute extra devices to your neighbors. Talk about what you learned here, share your knowledge. And unfortunately, we can't make any special accommodations for those who are unable to pick up their kit during the pickup times. So I hope you can make it on Thursday and Friday to pick up those kits. So this presentation is part of a whole lineup of events throughout the month of April with the Know Your Flow water awareness and celebration campaign. We are offering tons of ways to get engaged, including volunteer opportunities, workshops, K through 12 Life Without Water student art contest. We're also in the classrooms this month doing lessons with 3rd and 5th grade students. We have some weekly raffles that are happening on our Instagram page with some really great prizes. So make sure to follow us and participate in those if you haven't already. There are different water challenges that you can participate in. And our current raffle ends on Friday, and one commenter will be randomly selected for a $50 Hyperspud gift card. For more information, you can go to our website or social media. And this month's events are all funded through a generous water literacy grants that was awarded to us by the United States Department, our Environmental Protection Agency. So this is all funded off of a grant we received through them. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in tonight's speaker. Cara Haley has served with the City of Pullman as a city engineer since March 2019. Prior to taking over the duties of city engineer, Cara spent 3 years as a civil engineer with the City of Pullman. And before that, she worked as a project engineer for over 8 years at a private consulting firm just over the state border in Moscow, Idaho. Cara is a native to the Palouse region, having attended Moscow School District from 1st through 12th grade, and then graduated from Moscow High School in 2004. She has her bachelor's in civil engineering from U of I, and then later earned a master's of engineering in civil engineering from Colorado State University with an emphasis in water resources. Outside of the work that she does, Cara loves spending time with her husband and 3 young daughters. She's also an outdoor enthusiast and avid traveler with a passion for international service work. So without further ado, I will switch it over to Cara. I'll stop sharing my screen. And if you want to go ahead and share yours.
I've got a presentation. I'll just give me a second here.
Yeah.
Let me figure this out. I think I can get it. Hopefully technology will cooperate with me.
That looks great, Cara. We can see your screen.
All right, perfect. So I guess the title of my presentation today is Everyday Water Conservation, Ways to Help Save Water on the Palouse. And I just want to thank the Palouse Conservation District for putting this together and doing this month-long event. I think it's a fabulous way to get education and outreach out to the community about a really important cause. And here, oops, bear with me 1 second. Okay. So hopefully you can see this next slide, and I already had a really great introduction, so I'm not going to go through most of this, but here's a picture of my family and my 3 kids and my husband, and much of the information that I put into this slide was already introduced, but I guess one of the things that I didn't add, I'm a professional engineer in Washington and Idaho, and then I'm also since I've been city engineer for the City of Pullman, I'm a member of the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee, so I've been enjoyed getting involved with that over the last couple of years and hope to be involved for many more years to come. So I'm just really glad to be here with you guys tonight and to share some information. Hopefully you'll learn something new and you'll have some good questions at the end and we can have some good conversation. So after today's talk, you will understand the origins of our drinking water. So kind of where do we get our water and how does it get to you? You should be able to recognize how we individually and collectively affect our shared aquifer. And then you should be aware of various ways and measures to help conserve water. I probably won't touch on everything out there that's available to you, but I'll go over some of the low-hanging fruit and kind of get you thinking about different options to at least consider. Real quick here, I somehow lost my screen, my video of all you folks, and I guess maybe I don't need to see it. So hopefully that'll work out well. So before I move on to the next slide, this picture is a picture of our newest Pullman Transit Bus. We actually rolled it out in August of 2020, and it does display a water conservation theme, not only on the outside, but also on the inside. And I'm showing it on the slide because in a lot of ways it's the inspiration for my talk today. And I spent quite a bit of time working with one of our interns to put together some literature and information for the inside of the bus. So I'll be kind of basing some of the presentation on those slides, those posters. I'll also be adding in a lot of additional information, and I think it'll just be a really good discussion. So moving into our discussion, we really first need to talk about aquifers. So I've titled this page Aquifers 101, and I'm going to try and break it down pretty simply. So what is an aquifer? Well, it's an underground layer of rock where the cracks and spaces between the rocks are saturated and full of water. This water, which is held, is referred to as groundwater. Groundwater is found nearly everywhere and may be right below the ground surface, or it can sit hundreds of feet down. The picture on the slide that you can see right now, it's pretty simplistic, but it does nicely depict a shallow, unconfined aquifer located directly below a permeable layer of soil. And what I mean by permeable is that there are sufficient voids and spaces inside the ground material that water can easily pass downward through it. This type of aquifer directly interacts with nearby surface water. So on the slide, you see a river or a lake here. And you can easily decipher the difference between the saturated zone, where the groundwater is, and then the unsaturated zone. And this interface is often referred to as the groundwater table, and it can rise and fall due to various factors. There's environmental influences as well as human influences like pumping water. One way that it rises is through recharge, where groundwater is replenished by precipitation that seeps down into the ground. This next picture that I'm showing you is also a schematic of an aquifer. You can see the unconfined aquifer in the shallow area, but it also shows a confined aquifer. With this type of aquifer, there are layers of impermeable material both above and below, and it prevents water from seeping directly down into the aquifer from the ground surface above. Instead, the water usually has to take a longer path to get into the confined aquifer. And it has to come in, where the impermeable layer doesn't exist. So in this schematic, it would be somewhere over on this side. There's this darker blue layer, which represents that impermeable layer of material. Let's see, the confining layers cause a confined aquifer to be under pressure, which is different from an unconfined aquifer. So if you drill a well down into a confined aquifer, the water in the well will actually rise above the top of the aquifer. So I guess that's just kind of an interesting tidbit to add to it. One thing I want to add, and it looks like I skipped ahead earlier, but aquifers are not underground rivers or lakes. And I had this discussion with my husband. He probably saw a picture like this one on the bottom that shows a nice blue patch that looks like a giant lake of water underground. Well, the truth is aquifers can store large quantities of volume, but it's not just a straight up body of water. It's water that's stored inside of fractured rock and ground formation. So on this top picture, it looks more like, you see all this solid material, and then you have the rock that's saturating those open spaces. So I just like to point that out to folks because it can be a common misconception. And then I guess the last tidbit on this slide is groundwater is used for drinking water by more than 50% of people who live in the United States, including almost everyone who lives in rural areas. And this holds true on the Palouse, making groundwater a critical resource for our region. And I'm going to go to our next slide here. So looking specifically at our area and talking more about aquifers, it's important to know that the Palouse region sits above the Grande Ronde Aquifer. The Grande Ronde Aquifer is part of the Palouse groundwater basin. The exact limits of that basin are a little bit debatable, but the yellow line that you see on this figure is a pretty good representation of the approximate limits based on what geology tells us and what we know presently. Because aquifers are underground and can't be directly seen, we usually have to rely on incomplete data when we try to define and characterize them. We can often collect quality data on the subsurface geology and the hydrogeology at discrete locations, so usually where wells are drilled, but of course, wells are expensive, and really deep wells are not overly common, and as a result, researchers have to just do their best to fill in the missing gaps and make some estimations about what's going on underground. When we talk specifically about Pullman residents, groundwater from the Grande Ronde Aquifer is the only source of water used for drinking water purposes. I'll touch a tiny bit on a separate aquifer later called the Wannacomb Aquifer, which is a shallower aquifer in the Moscow region. Moscow traditionally has had a well or two, I believe, that pull from that aquifer, but as of late, it doesn't make up a large portion of the water that they pull, and both the Grande Ronde and the Wannacomb, we think interact. So on top of this, the aquifer is used and shared by everyone on the Palouse. So in this nice figure, even rural residents between Colfax and Palouse, Moscow, Pullman, it's a shared resource, and we all use it. So it's important that we're aware of that. So how do we access the groundwater in our aquifer? Well, we extract groundwater through wells that are drilled into the aquifer. And simply put, a well is a pipe in the ground that essentially fills up with groundwater. Water in a well can be brought to the surface by a pump, or in the case of an artesian well, which is actually shown in the middle portion of the slide, the pressure in a confined aquifer can cause it to actually be free-flowing all the way at the surface, at the ground surface. And actually, Pullman's first source of water supply was from an artesian well, which was drilled in 1884. The well is no longer flowing or in use, but it is a reminder of the original state of the Grande Ronde Aquifer prior to the 130-plus years that have since followed, in which the region has relied heavily on pulling water from the aquifer for drinking water purposes. Nowadays, groundwater in our region is pumped by 4 major water suppliers to over 60,000 people. This includes primarily Pullman, Moscow, and then as well as both of the universities, WSU and U of I. There's also other small towns, rural businesses, and rural residents with private wells who also pull water from the basin, although a lot of the information that I'll present and the focus of those is not on this presentation, as they don't constitute too much of a majority of the water use. It's primarily these 4 water suppliers. So this next slide's a little messy. Don't let all the text and the colors and everything confuse you. I'll try and break it down kind of simply. But what you see here is a generalized cross-section of the geology in our region. And it more or less represents a line that is cut through Pullman and Moscow from west to east. So on the right side, you see Moscow. On the left is Pullman. And if you were standing between the 2 cities facing northward, you would be somewhere right where I dropped that red arrow. The different colors that you see are different rock formations under the ground surface. You can see that they tend to form in layers, each with differing characteristics and properties. The black vertical lines that you see kind of scattered throughout are actually wells that have been drilled throughout the region, many of them extending deep down into the Grande Ronde basalts. The key is a little hard to see, but a lot of the basalts are the kind of the green colors, as well as the reds and the pinks and the oranges. And then as we get further down, like I explained, we don't have a lot of information, so we've got a lot of question marks and uncertainties. I mentioned the Wannacomb Aquifer earlier, and that's located more in the Moscow region, and it's represented more by the blue shadings that you see on this figure. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty about how fast and how quickly the Grande Ronde Aquifer gets recharged, but it is believed that the Wannacomb and the Grande Ronde Aquifers do interact with each other. And also that a lot of the recharge may take place in the Moscow Mountain region. So just kind of an interesting tidbit. Like I said, it's a lot of characterization and research to try and figure out what's going on, and researchers do the best they can, but there are missing pieces. So since Pullman's first well was drilled in 1884, which I mentioned earlier, the City of Pullman, and I will focus most of my presentation on Pullman because that's the information that I know the most of, but a lot of it will, similar behaviors happen for City of Moscow and other areas. But the City of Pullman has drilled 8 additional wells, and 5 of those are currently used and active. Pullman's wells range in depth from just under 200 feet, and you can kind of see it on the slide, to nearly 1,000 feet below the ground surface. And I don't personally know much about the WSU number 7 well, but it's the longest one that you can see on this figure here, and it does extend over 2,000 feet down into the ground. So how does drinking water ultimately reach you? Well, water is pumped from the wells. Usually it gets treated. In Pullman, we treat it at the well house to make it safe for drinking. And then it's pumped to holding tanks around town. The City of Pullman has 11 storage facilities and tanks, which provide adequate storage for typical water use demands, and they also help to stabilize necessary pressures in the distribution system. And then, of course, drinking water flows through that distribution system, and it's delivered straight to consumers in a pressurized network of underground pipes. So I won't go into too much detail here. This is just a really rough snapshot, but it shows an aerial image of kind of the Pullman region, and all of those green lines are basically water mains that make up Pullman's distribution system. I guess before I ask this question, if folks want to enter information into the chat, hopefully I can pull it up here and see it. Let's see, and I actually did pull that up. But let me just give a little bit more background on it. So the green makes up the main distribution lines. Typically what's shown here ranges in size from 2 inches to 12 inches, and our most common pipe size is 8 inches. You can also see I'm not showing the WSU region. They do have their own water supply system and distribution system, although there actually are 4 locations between Pullman system and WSU system that are, we call them our emergency interties, and in the event that there was emergency, that would allow us to share water between the 2 systems. I'm also not showing private service lines on this figure, but obviously there's significantly more lines that run from these green lines directly to houses and businesses. And I guess I'll ask the question and give about 30 seconds or so. Does anyone want to take a stab at how many miles of pipe are shown on this figure? And I don't have any guesses yet. 2,000, all right. See if we can get 1 or 2 500, okay. These are all great guesses. It's kind of hard to look at a figure and figure out quite how much that is. 750, okay, wonderful. Okay, 900, all right, I'll stop the guessing. 300, you guys are doing great. 1,650. And actually, one of our closest was 70. So we actually have 115 miles of pipe that are shown on this figure right now. And I'm sure if we added in all the service lines, although those are private, we would get significantly more. But it is, I guess the point there is a lot of pipe, and it takes a lot of infrastructure to get water from the wells, from the aquifers to the consumers. So I think we've more or less covered our first objective, and so we're going to move on to the second, which is discussion about why we should care, where we are getting our water, and how much we are using. And I'm going to start by giving you guys kind of a solid grasp on how much water it is that we actually use. So looking specifically at Pullman again, and I'm mostly looking at 2019-2020 data, the average resident uses roughly 90 gallons of water per day. This equates to a daily pumping rate in Pullman that averages at 2.5 million gallons of water per day. So that's what we pull out of the aquifer. And then annually, that equates to 918 million gallons. 90 gallons per day, I think, is a little bit easier to grasp for folks. You know, we think about a gallon of milk, and we can kind of start to wrap our head around that. I'm going to return to, I mentioned that water conservation bus, and so the snapshot that I just put here is one of the posters that we put up in that bus. And what we wanted to do was try and find a relatable way that we could explain really large amounts of water to people so that they could, you know, find it more relatable. And one of the ways we did that, being in Pullman and having lots of WSU students, is we thought it would be fun to estimate the volume of water that it takes to fill Martin Stadium. And we're talking about kind of like it looks on this chart here. So you've got your full-size football field, all the area around it, and the first layer or two of bleachers would be filled up with water. And so we had fun coming up with some computations and trying to estimate that, and what we came at was that you could fill Martin Stadium with 21 million gallons worth of water. So hopefully some of you have stood in there before and you can kind of wrap your head around that a little bit. And when we kind of use that measure, I'm going to refer to it as the Martin Stadium unit of measure. The City of Pullman alone pumps enough water annually to fill Martin Stadium 44 times. So again, we're talking about large amounts of water. We as a population use a lot of water just naturally. So talking more regionally, I do want to focus a little bit on the region as a whole as well. The total for the whole region, and again, we're talking Moscow, Pullman, U of I, and WSU, pumped 2.19 billion gallons of water in total in 2020. Back to our Martin Stadium unit of measure, this would fill Martin Stadium 107 times. And then here's a quick breakout of what the different suppliers use, and actually the City of Palouse is on here as well. This chart actually came from the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee, and the City of Palouse does donate some money to that cause, and so they get a nice pie on the chart here. But you can see that Pullman as a whole uses 41% of the total. Moscow in 2020 used about 34%, and then WSU and U of I used a smaller amount. So next, I'm going to go over what I call are some fast facts on typical water usage. We're going to start with typical indoor water usage. And so the EPA, I pulled a lot of this off of EPA WaterSense. They estimate that indoor water usage takes up about 70% of the total household usage, and that's nationally. And I have a really good question here about what is the usage of residential versus business usage, and I don't have a great breakout of that right here, but that's something I probably could follow up on later. But back to the indoor water usage, here's kind of a breakout of what they say the biggest contributors to that are, and by far the highest is toilets, so flushing toilets, leaking toilets. Toilets just use up a lot of water. The daily use by a person is 18.5 gallons per person for toilets. And then, as you go down the list, clothes washers use a lot of water, showers and faucets. So anytime we run our faucet, that's a continuous stream of water that we're using. And there's also leaks, baths, dishwashers, several other common contributors. With typical indoor usage taking up roughly 70% of the household total, that leaves 30% to outdoor water usage. It's important to note, again, that this is the national average, and that percentage for water usage can actually be, or outdoor water usage can be much higher, particularly in drier areas and more water-intensive landscapes. But I'm going to show you with this slide that regionally, we actually come fairly close to these national statistics, at least in 2020. So the chart that you see in front of you actually breaks out the 2020 pumping over the course of a year, and it does so by listing the monthly percentage of the total pumping, and this is from all of the major suppliers. I really like this chart because it does quickly illustrate the impacts of outdoor water usage. And you can quickly see in the months of June, July, August, September, kind of right in that summer period, that pumping does significantly increase. In fact, for June through September, pumping makes up roughly 50% of the total pumping for the year, and that really can be attributed mostly to irrigation. I've also drawn this red line on the chart, and that attempts to kind of break out the baseline water usage based on primarily that indoor water usage. And I went ahead and set it at about 6% on average. And when you add that up, you can see that the total indoor usage is about 72%, and the total outdoor usage is about 28%. So it's not an exact match to those national averages, but we do come close. So what? Why should you care? Well, I think a lot of people on this presentation are already aware of this, but water level in the Grande Ronde Aquifer has receded by 100 feet over the last 85 years. This is a chart that gets thrown around a lot, and I really like it. It shows the water levels in Pullman well number 3, which is behind what used to be the old Pullman Building Supply building. Now it's more recently it's been the Lumberyard restaurant here in Pullman. The well is out of production now, and we just use it for monitoring, but you can see that the water levels have dropped by 25 to 30 feet in a little over 30 years. From 1990 to 2000, the water level dropped by roughly 1 foot per year. In the decade that followed that, it dropped by about 0.88 feet per year. And then in the last 10 years or so, the rate of decline has dropped slightly again, with water levels dropping an average of 0.71 feet per year. The chart doesn't show water levels before 1990, but I will note that it was in 1992 that the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee enacted a groundwater management plan, and that was aimed at ensuring a safe supply of groundwater and that it would exist for present and future use in the Pullman-Moscow region. So in the 90s, there was a lot of focus on and attention into this matter and trying to change our habits. And so conservation efforts really did start to grow and become more important in the region. And it does show with the data, with that decline, with the decline in the rate that the water level has dropped, it does show that conservation has been helping. But still, water levels continue to drop. And that's a concerning trend that we want to try and be aware of and work against. One thing to add on this, in the same 30-year period that I've shown here, the City of Pullman has actually seen our population increase by 50%, so a pretty significant amount, and it's only expected to continue growing, which is going to continue to result in increased demand for water. So there's always a battle between conserving and as more people come, there's more people use more water, and that pulls more water from our aquifer as well. So we've identified the source of our drinking water, and I've explained the importance of protecting it, but how specifically can we help? Well, for starters, there are a lot of ongoing community efforts aimed at trying to keep our water usage down, and I think a big one and a really important one is education and outreach. A lot of people don't know about this issue and the importance of working toward a solution, and they really just don't have any idea what's going on. So simply getting involved and informing others can go a long ways, and our community really does a great job at doing this. Obviously, there's the Palouse Conservation District. Otherwise, you guys wouldn't be here today listening to me. I've also mentioned the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee, so PBAC. And they're actually working actively to try and educate and engage with the community as well. They're doing a lot of research, trying to understand and characterize the basin, the aquifer, and they're right now actively working on trying to select 1 or 2 quality long-term water supply projects that could be alternatives to pulling from our aquifer. So there's a lot going on. One other thing that I listed up here, and I know there's a lot more, so please keep that in mind. There's the annual water summit, and that's another great educational opportunity. It usually takes place, I think, in October every year, and they'll discuss a lot of varying water topics relevant to our community and also globally. So if you haven't been to that before, definitely keep an ear out for it and check it out. So let's see, another ongoing community effort kind of comes from the suppliers of the water themselves, and most of them will implement what I call water use efficiency programs and measures. This can include a whole slew of things. I've only listed a few here, and these are some of the ones that are more common to our area, but it can include providing rebates, water savings devices, and I'll talk a little bit more about those on the next page. let's see, conservation rate structures. So obviously a lot of communities, Pullman and Moscow included, they set their water rates in a way that encourages folks to not use excessive water, especially in the summer months. Water reclamation is another great one. On that previous pie chart where I showed the different suppliers and how much they used out of the 2020 pumping total, the University of Idaho wedge was a lot smaller. And the reason for that is University of Idaho pulls from the aquifer for drinking water, but they actually use reclaimed wastewater for irrigating the golf course and some of their landscaped areas. So that's one way that communities can get creative and try to use reclaimed water so we're not pulling it back out of the aquifer. And then also I mentioned source meters and service meters. This is kind of an obvious thing, but in years past, these didn't always go in, but it's really important that suppliers have source meters right at their wells, and there's also service meters, of course, for all of the consumers who are using it. It just helps for tracking and monitoring. It's also really important. It establishes baselines, and it holds people accountable, both suppliers and consumers, because they can get real-time information about how much water they're using. A couple other noteworthy items as far as supplier efforts and community efforts go. One thing that suppliers can do is try and change their operational schemes to be more efficient. They can replace aging infrastructure. So we've got that 115 miles worth of pipe. Well, some of it's 50 plus years old or 80 plus years old, and leaks can make up a large portion of water that's lost. So trying to replace that and prevent that's important. And then there's a lot of really cool new technology out there that can help support leak detection. There's smart meters that can be employed, which can actually, they can look at trends in water use and send out alerts if issues arise, like suddenly you're using more water than you would usually, it can send out an alert. So I know communities are working towards implementing some of those things, and I'm optimistic a lot more will take place in the coming years. How can you help directly? Well, I mentioned those rebates and devices on the previous page, and I definitely encourage folks to cash in on those. And in fact, if you didn't get signed up for the ones that the Palouse Conservation District did, that seemed like a really great kit that they put together. So a lot of these things are the same things that they're providing, and I would encourage everybody to look into those and use them. So toilet rebates, I guess just circling back to the pie chart that I presented on indoor water usage, toilets are a huge culprit. So one way to cut down on that water usage is target that in particular. City of Pullman has a rebate program, and you know, the idea there is to typically replace older toilets that use anywhere from 3.5 to 7 gallons of water per flush with much lower efficiency toilets. New models range anywhere between 1 and 1.6 gallons per flush. So there are pretty huge differences. Pretty big strides have come in the toilet world and how much water we use. But depending on what you're replacing or what you're installing, the rebate that the City of Pullman offers right now is between $50 to $150. Replacing high water use irrigated areas on your property is another rebate worth considering to help save water. And again, it targets that outdoor water usage, that irrigation that pops are pumping up in the summer months. Pullman's program will give you a $150 rebate if you replace 300 square feet or more of lawn, basically in favor of drought-resistant plantings. And then there's free devices. The kit that's being offered to you guys actually includes a lot of these and a few additional ones, but these are what City of Pullman offers right now. The first one's water-saving shower heads, and those are just helpful. You know, they maintain the feel of high-pressure flow, but they use less water than traditional shower heads. Bathroom faucet aerators or kitchen faucet aerators. The City of Pullman specifically offers the bathroom ones at this point, but you basically install them on the end of your faucet. They have small mesh screens, and they break off the flow and they introduce air into the water stream. And so that air kind of dilutes the water stream, and it uses less water, but it still maintains that high pressure flow feel. So those are a really handy way to go. Toilet leak detection dye tablets, leaky toilets, or just leaks in general. There's that 13.7% on this chart. Trying to identify and fix those can go a long ways. The way toilet leak detection dye tablets work, you basically just throw them into your tank and you wait about 10 minutes. And then if you see dye come out in the bowl of your toilet, you know that you have a leak and you have something that is worth fixing. And then lawn timers are pretty straightforward. You attach them to your spigot on the exterior. They can have a timer, so even though your faucet might be left on, you can set it for, say, 30 minutes, and it'll shut the water flow off once that 30 minutes ends in the event that you get busy with something and you don't realize you haven't turned your water off. And then, you know, I've really only highlighted what City of Pullman offers right now. If you're interested in those specifically, you can go to our website, pullmanconserves.com, and there's a lot more information about those. You can look at the contact information about how you would get a hold of some of those things or go about cashing in on rebates or credits. But I know Moscow and other programs have, or communities have similar programs, so I would encourage you to check out their websites as well, especially if you live in Moscow or one of those other regions. And then how else can you help? Well, for starters, you can consider changing certain habits to decrease your own personal water usage. I'm going to return back to the water conservation bus that I mentioned earlier and is also shown in this picture again. And we'll kind of go through some of the posters that we put on the interior of bus that talk about some different habit changing measures that you can take. And then as I go through them, what you'll start to see is that if enough people are successful in implementing some of these efforts, it can actually add up to a substantial amount of collective water savings. So the first one that I have here is pretty straightforward, but it's a good thing to remind folks of, and it's to decrease your shower time. So decreasing your showers by 3 minutes daily could save 4,200 gallons per year. If 1 out of 2 Pullman residents shorten their showers, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium 3 times. A couple tidbits associated with this. A 5-minute shower uses between 10 and 25 gallons of water, and that depends on the type of fixtures that are in there. And then actually, the statistic that I found showed that the average shower length is actually 8 minutes long. So if you were in that average range and you decreased your shower by about 3 minutes, that would put you at about 5 minutes. And I'm sure some of you actually shower less than that. But I guess the big takeaway from this slide is do what you can to shower efficiently and quickly, and it can make a big difference. Habit changing practice 2 would be less frequent baths. So I'll read this, but by limiting baths, you could personally save 7,100 gallons per year. If all Pullman bath takers, and there's an asterisk there that says we're assuming 10% of Pullman residents currently take baths over showers, and that was a wild card guess. That might not be totally true, but we'll go with it. If they swap their daily bath for a shower just 4 times per week, the total water saved annually could completely fill Martin Stadium 1 time. Just for kind of comparison purposes, a typical bath uses between 30 to 75 gallons of water. And that's about 1.5 to 4 times more than a typical shower, of course, depending on what kind of faucet, or I'm sorry, what kind of shower head is used in the shower and how long that shower takes place. But I'm not going to totally knock down on baths because there are some plus sides to baths, and a lot of people do use those. You can actually spend as much time in the bath as you want, whereas when you're in the shower and it's running, you're definitely taking away at that water. And then I read this one, and I thought this was interesting and actually very creative. You could reuse your bath water for other creative purposes, such as watering your plants around your house, maybe indoor plants, or even doing some hand wash laundry if you needed to. Habit changing practice number 3, less frequent laundry. So doing fewer, larger loads of laundry could save 7,300 gallons per year per household. If 1 out of 2 Pullman households wash their clothes half as frequently, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium 2 times. So the traditional washing machine, older machines I'm talking about, they use between 27 to 54 gallons of water per load. And of course, one thing you can do is get a newer, more efficient model, which uses closer to 15 to 30 gallons per load. But of course, I'm also encouraging here to just make sure that you're washing larger loads of laundry where you can, and just being cognizant and aware of the fact that washing machines can use up a lot of water. Habit changing practice number 4 is a big one. I try and teach my kids to do this. Brush your teeth without running the tap. So turning the faucet off while brushing your teeth could save 2,900 gallons per year. If 1 out of 2 Pullman residents stop running the faucet while brushing their teeth, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium 2 times. So on average, about 2 gallons of water flow from a faucet each minute. Now, if you're using one of the aerators, that can drop to about 1 gallon per minute, so that would affect this number. But anytime we're running that water, we really ought to be using it as efficiently as possible. And then turning off the tap while you brush your teeth can basically save you up to 8 gallons of water per day, and that assumes you're brushing your teeth twice a day for 2 minutes each time. Here's an interesting one that I think is worth considering. Scrape wasted food off of your dishes opposed to running the tap. So scraping food off your plate rather than using running water can conserve 7,300 gallons per year per household. If 1 out of 2 Pullman households stop running the faucet to remove wasted food, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium 2 times. For this, we basically estimated that 10 gallons of water would be saved per load of dishes, and that was based on a lot of research online. And again, these are all estimates, but we tried to be as accurate as we could. And the real takeaway is simply skip the rinse part. If you just take your fork and you scrape it, you're not running that water over it, and a lot of newer dishwashers can actually clean up a lot of that material pretty good. And then only run the dishwasher when you have a full load if you can. And then if you are washing dishes by hand rather than in the dishwasher, make sure that you're not using running water. You're using a basin of soapy water, or you've plugged the sink. And then I think I just have 2 more here. The 6th one is fix household leaks. So fixing leaks in your household distribution system could save up to 10,000 gallons per year. If 1 out of 3 Pullman households check for and repaired leaks, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium nearly 2 times. So common leak types, worn toilet flappers, that's what those leak detection dye tablets can help you decipher. Dripping faucets, other leaking valves. You know, a lot of these are actually pretty easy to fix as long as you can identify them and fix them early. Fixing easily correct, let's see. So fixing easy to correct household water leaks can save owners about 10% on their water bills. So not only for the purposes of protecting our aquifer, but it can also save you money. Here was an interesting statistic. So annual household leaks waste 1 trillion gallons nationwide, and that amount that's wasted would actually make up the water use in 11 million homes. So that's a significant amount of additional population that we could serve if we were to take care of those leaks. And then 10,000 gallons of water equals, you know, typical household leaks, and that actually equates to about 270 plus loads of laundry that you could do. So just a few things to consider and think about. And then lastly, a very common one, of course, try to replace your toilet with a more efficient one if you can, but also try and flush toilets less. By flushing toilets less often, you could save 4,200 gallons per year. If 1 out of 3 Pullman residents flush half as frequently, the water saved annually could fill Martin Stadium 2 times. So related stats, the average American, from what I could find, flushes the toilet about 5 times per day. Just think about that. Maybe you can drop it a couple of notches, or maybe you're higher and you can get down to that average, but it's an easy way to try and save some water, especially when we know that toilet use makes up, you know, roughly 1/4 of all indoor household water use. Here's kind of a little blurry, fun schematic, but it shows you kind of those much bigger, larger, older models, but I mentioned that some of those were anywhere from 3.5 to 7 gallons per flush, but assuming that you replaced any of these with a 1.6 gallon per flush toilet replacement, you can see you get huge percentage of water savings. So even a 3.5 gallon per flush toilet, if you replace that with the 1.6 version, you'd save 54% of the amount of water that you were using previously to flush the toilet. So these are pretty big savings. So definitely take a look at your toilets, and if it makes sense to replace those, that's a great way to go. So this last slide summarizes the last 7 slides, and it kind of identifies the various habit-changing practices and the resulting annual savings. I'm not going to reread each of these, but what I really want to hone in on here is the total annual savings. So if you add all these Martin stadiums up, you will find, and I guess assuming that we were successful in all of these things, which is certainly something to strive for, you would find that Pullman would save roughly 14 Martin stadiums worth of water per year. And then when you compare this to Pullman's total annual use, which was the 44, this would actually be 32% savings for Pullman. So, and then I guess comparing it to the region's use as well, and I'm assuming strictly that Pullman residents make these changes, then we've actually saved 13% savings regionally. So again, my takeaway here is that these really are substantial potential savings if we can get people to buy in and be serious about their water use. And then I guess if nothing else, it's intriguing to see how our individual practices can collectively make a large impact on our critical water resource. So think about some of these things that you can do over the next couple of days, and I guess I just encourage everyone to give them a try. And then in conclusion, I hope you now understand the origins of our region's drinking water, recognize how we individually and collectively affect our shared and declining aquifer, and are aware of various ways and measures you can take to help conserve water and make an impactful difference in our region. And I'll try and answer questions here. If I can't answer them, or you have something that comes to your mind after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I put my email address here, and I would be happy to follow that discussion. And it looks like I just closed my slide, so bear with me here. I will get that back up.
Thank you, Cara. That was a wonderful presentation. Lots of really great, useful information in there that hopefully we can all take back to our personal lives. So at this time, we'll open the floor up to some questions. You can use the chat box to drop them in, or if you'd like to unmute yourself, please feel free to do that. And we can direct the question to you, call on you. So we do have a few questions coming in. Cara, if you can see the chat, but I can read those off to you as well.
Yeah, I can. I just saw one come in that says, are there any plans for WSU to start reclaiming water for irrigation? I think that's a great question. There actually have been joint efforts between WSU and the City of Pullman to start planning towards that and look at what that would take. I believe a couple of years ago, a 30% kind of conceptual design was put together to evaluate that. And it's also one of, I mentioned the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee. It's also one of the alternatives that have been explored through the Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee. And it really needs to be a joint effort. The City of Pullman maintains the wastewater treatment plant, and the big challenge with that is getting that reclaimed water from the wastewater treatment plant back to the campus or to the areas that need it the most. So I think the initial findings show that it would be a worthwhile effort for the amount of money that you would put in to do that and put the infrastructure in place for it. You don't get a huge bang for your buck in water savings for the amount that you spend, but it's certainly something that is on the table and has been discussed in the past and will continue to be discussed moving forward. So great question. I know it's really effective for the U of I as well. One thing that's nice about the U of I is their wastewater treatment plant is a little bit closer to their campus, so that does make it a little bit easier. But not something that should be overlooked.
So does all of WSU's gray water go to the sewage treatment place, the City Pullman? Okay.
Yes, it does. It does. So they actually own and maintain their own sanitary sewer lines. So on campus, they will install those. They have their own construction practices, those sorts of things. But it ultimately comes into our system and our piping and makes it all the way to the wastewater treatment plant. So there is a joint agreement in place, and WSU pitches in some money to help operate and maintain the wastewater treatment plant. So that's an interesting, I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, and then we have a few other questions here too. Talking about options for recharge, specifically there was a question about using reservoirs as a recharge. Could you talk about the options for recharge in the aquifer?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's a few different approaches. So when I think of reservoir initially, so I mentioned 50% of the nation uses groundwater for water supply, while that other 50% comes from surface water sources. So like directly from a reservoir, or maybe they pull water out of a river, treat it, and send that to consumers. So I guess I see kind of two parts to that question. One option would be to construct a reservoir to collect surface water, and then like that other 50%, actually treat that surface water and send it to the communities that way. And what that would do is that would allow us to stop pulling as much water out of the aquifer, and that would allow for natural recharge to hopefully get the water levels to come back up, or at least stabilize. So that's kind of one option. Some communities, there are areas around town, I wouldn't say a full-on reservoir, but there are certain places where maybe natural recharge occurs better than others. So trying to get water to those locations so that they can naturally seep down into the ground quicker is certainly another option. The Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee, one of the options looks at putting in a reservoir like we've just talked about, and that's more of a surface water source, but it would take significant amounts of water, and we wouldn't have to pump as much from the aquifer anymore. So these are all really huge issues. Some of the challenges with these in a reservoir is we've got our basin, and it's actually an interstate basin because it's in Idaho and it's in Washington. So you get lots of issues between the two states, and permitting requirements, and what you have to follow, and what kind of agreements and things have to be in place to share that water across those borders. But, you know, truth be told, the geology does what it wants. It doesn't know where the border is, and we do share that between the two states. So, okay, great question.
And then we've had a few questions come in, and I'm not sure if you can speak to this, but about the growth and development of Pullman and the surrounding region, and things that are being done maybe to require developers to make changes with buildings and developments, or
Sure.
you know, there's been in the news a lot of large housing developments that are in the works. Yep. So yeah, do you know anything that's being done that way?
Yeah, so, and actually one person has a question here, can we require developers to institute these changes in new buildings and developments? You know, a lot of developers are actually doing a really good job of using, you know, more efficient toilets, more faucets, that sort of thing. As far as I know right now, like Pullman City Code doesn't require it, but there's always discussions about that and ways that we can encourage that. What was I going to say? I had something specific to add to that. Oh, so I kind of anticipated a question sort of along these lines coming. And what I wanted to mention that's actually interesting is conservation efforts since 1992 have actually made a big difference. So while our population growth has grown over 50% in the last 30 years, Pullman's actual pumping has only increased by 3%. So we've actually, even though the community continues to grow, we're making up for a lot of that by conservation efforts. And at some point, we might reach a point where that becomes more difficult. But I think the trends that we're seeing don't encourage us to not support growth.
Bill?
I know there's all these big student housing developments that are going in, and certainly those individual developments are going to, I mean, take up some more water, but we're talking about houses, you know, similarly that, you know, a typical person, you know, each time we're adding one of those units and houses and new people coming in, although it seems like it's concentrated on those areas, it's kind of like the community developing a little bit slower as well. But City of Pullman does support development, and it's good for the economy in the region, and so it is a balance between it and trying to encourage folks to use it wisely, and I think education and outreach is really important there. So times may change, and if things get tighter, certainly more restrictions, higher. There's some communities that structure their rate structuring much more conservatively than we do, and it really promotes people to not irrigate. We haven't had to go there yet, but it's certainly a topic open for debate and always on the table as well.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you, Cara. We are at time here. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge here and these great tips. We really appreciate the time. I do just have a few things to wrap up before we finish off our evening together. You will all be receiving an email shortly to take a post-event survey. And please give us your feedback about this talk. It helps shape future events and gives us some inspiration for future topics that you would like to hear. It should only take a minute or two of your time. Additionally, everyone this evening is eligible to receive a free water saving device kit, and then that can be picked up at the PCD office tomorrow and Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. and more information will be coming in that email to you shortly. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you so much to Cara for her presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful night.